Audio is clear and screen is also clear. Is that okay? Screen is also visible properly?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine, fine. So let's start off. Uh, I think these are the basic things that we discussed in a very beginning about the overview of income tax laws, then overview of syllabus. We spoke about two types of definitions, inclusive and exhaustive, and we were discussing the definition of the word person. Have we concluded this or we are halfway through? What is the status?
So we have concluded this. I
We
suppose
have
we
concluded.
did, Hindu undivided family.
Acha, we have not concluded. We were discussing about HUF.
Yes.
Okay. Then I think we will start up fresh with definition of the word person so that in that flow everything will be discussed. Okay. So we're referring to definition of person under section 2, subsection 31. Again, it's an inclusive definition. The definition says the person includes the following. So 1, 2, 3, 4 various terms or various aspects are provided in the definition. In the first place, it says that it includes an individual. What do you mean by an individual? Individual is a natural person, a human being, and therefore a man, a woman, even a minor child is included within the purview of the word individual. So natural person is what we call it as individual. Even if the person is of unsound mind, okay, lunatic person, he will still be covered within the purview of the word individual. So individual, a natural human being, a natural person. The second one is Hindu undivided family. Now, this definition of Hindu undivided family is not available in income tax law. And whenever such scenario arises, we go to some other legislation where this particular term may be defined. And for HUF, we usually refer to the definition available in Hindu law. If you go to the definition says a Hindu undivided family is a family consisting of all those persons who have linearly descended from a common ancestor, and it further includes their wives and unmarried daughters. That is the concept of HUF as per Hindu law. So let us break this definition in different parts to make the understanding better. What is a HUF? The Hindu law says it's a family. So we are looking at a family. What kind of family? Consisting of all those persons who have linearly descended from a common ancestor. So we are referring to a family which comprises of group of individuals who have a common ancestor. So if you draw a family tree, you can trace back to that common ancestor. Then the further part of the definition says it includes their wives. So if any of them get married, then their wives will also become a part of this HUF. And unmarried daughters. So if there are any daughters in the family, as long as they are unmarried, those unmarried daughters will also be a part and parcel of this Hindu undivided family. Let's take an example to understand different issues associated with HUF. Let's take a case where Mr. X is there. He has two sons, A and B, one daughter, C, who is still not married, and his wife is there, Mrs. X. Now, if you look at the family, Mr. X and both his sons, A and B, they share a common ancestor. Okay, so if you draw a family tree, their forefathers you can trace back to the common ancestor. So X, A and B, all of them have a common ancestor. So the definition requires that it's a family consisting of all those persons who have a common ancestor. That condition is fulfilled. It further says that it includes their wives. Now Mr. A got married, so Mrs. A has become a part of this Hindu undivided family. And unmarried daughters. Now their daughter is C. C is still not married, so C will be within the purview of this HUF. So even daughter C will then become a member of this HUF on her birth, and she will be there in the family as long as she is not married, because it includes only unmarried daughters. tomorrow if C gets married, she will cease to be a member of this HUF. Then A and B, there are two sons, as I said. Suppose tomorrow Mr. A gets married, then Mrs. A will become a part of this HUF because it includes their wives. So that's a concept of HUF which evolves over a period of time. Now in this case, Mr. X is known as a Karta or head of the family. All the legal responsibilities of legal compliances, management of properties, management of investments, taking care of entire HUF's affairs, business or otherwise, is the responsibility of Karta. And whenever HUF has any business, investments, properties, whatever income it earns, it will belong to the HUF. It will neither belong to Karta nor to any of the members of HUF because HUF is considered as a distinct legal entity for the purpose of taxation. So that entire income investment belongs to HUF and not to any of the individuals who are part of HUF. Now Mr. A, B, all of them will be known as members of HUF. So if at all HUF is earning some income, then the Karta of HUF can take a decision and he can distribute this income among the members of HUF. But there is no fixed proportion. It's left to the discretion of Karta of HUF. So this is the concept of HUF for the purpose of income tax. As we progress further, one more thing before we wind up the discussion on HUF. In case of HUF, this option is also available to Jain families and Sikh families to whom this limited aspect of law will apply. And you can even have a HUF within Jain community or even in Sikh communities. Though the term used is Hindu undivided family, for practical purposes, even these two communities, they can have the Hindu undivided family. And as I told you, it's a family which evolves. There is a status which is conferred on the family. So you need not have to form a HUF. It evolves. And secondly, there is no registration or such for HUF like a partnership form, etc. Because it's by status which is conferred by Hindu law. It's a status conferred on the family by the provisions of Hindu law. So there is no separate registration or these kind of things. And one very important thing about HUF is it's a very powerful tax planning tool in the hands of a taxpayer. Whenever a taxpayer wants to optimize his tax liabilities, one of the powerful tools in his hands, simplest and powerful tool, is Hindu undivided family. And many times this is very commonly used tax planning device for the purpose of optimization of tax liabilities. Are you clear about the concept of HUF? Can we move further? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Any queries on HUF? Everybody has understood the concept and the examples?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So we go to the next part of definition of the word person, and that is company. Now, we all of us know what is the definition of the word company. The definition we know, it's an artificial entity created under a law and has a perpetual succession and a common seal. That is a kind of definition we know. But for the purpose of income tax, what do you mean by a company? Let us understand one by one. Firstly, it includes an Indian company. So, if the company is incorporated under the laws applicable to company in India, then that will be a company for the purpose of income tax. Now, when you say law applicable to companies in India, the latest one is Companies Act 2013. Prior to that, there was Companies Act 1956. And prior to that, there was one more act. I don't recollect the year in which that was passed, but it dated back to British era. So there was one more act prior to that. So even all those companies which were registered under the previous acts will still become the company for this purpose. Apart from that, before independence, there were different princely states. Okay, for example, state of Baroda and state of Mysore and several other states were there. Now, some of these states in those days had their own law dealing with the company. And companies might have been incorporated under those respective state laws in those years, those companies will still be treated as company for the purpose of income tax. Then it includes a company which is incorporated outside India. So that means a foreign company. A foreign company which is governed by law outside India of a particular country, and under that particular law the company is incorporated, even that entity becomes a company for this definition. Then there is a specific provision over here in this definition of the word company applicable to that, which says that even if you have any other entity which may or may not be registered or incorporated as a company, will be deemed to be a company by a general or special order of Central Board of Direct Taxes. So the Supreme Administrative Authority on Direct Tax Laws in India, the Central Board of Direct Taxes, has a power, and with this power it can notify that a particular entity will be deemed to be a company for the purpose of income tax. And in that case, that by virtue of that particular order, that entity will be treated as company for the purpose of income tax. It can be a special order or it can be a general order applicable to a class of entities. And all those entities to whom that order applies will be deemed to be companies for the purpose of taxation. Then the next is firm. A firm includes a traditional partnership firm under 1932 Act, or even a limited liability partnership under 2008 Act. So whether it is LLP or whether it is traditional partnership firm, both are considered as firm for this purpose. Under Partnership Act, if you recall, you do not have a separate recognition for partnership. There is no individual separate legal identity for partnership. Okay, but for the purpose of income tax, it will have a separate legal status. It will have a separate legal identity apart from its partners. So that is the concept of partnership firm. Any queries, clarification on company and firm, or can we proceed? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. No questions, no clarity required further. We can proceed. Okay. Next is an association of persons or body of individuals, very commonly referred to as an AOP or BOI. If you see the definition, there are a few more words attached to that. It says that an association of persons or body of individuals, whether incorporated or not. So what it implies is registration is not really required. It is not a mandatory requirement. So an AOP or BOI could be registered or unregistered. Now we need to find out what exactly is meant by AOP or BOI and what is the difference between these two. Basically, an AOP or BOI is a group of persons who have come together for some common action, for some common interest, etc. It may be business, it may be non-business purpose, it may be commercial purpose, it may be non-commercial purpose. It is a group of persons who have come together for some common interest, action, etc. Then what is the difference between these two terms, AOP and BOI? The difference is very simple. In case of body of individuals, only the individuals can become the member. Non-individuals are not allowed to become the members of BOI. And in case of an association of persons, it is both individuals as well as non-individuals who can become the members of an association of persons. That's the difference between these two. Let me share with you a couple of examples. A cooperative society, a cooperative housing society is a classic example of an association of persons, because in this case both individuals and non-individuals can become the member. Even a partnership firm is allowed to become the member of a cooperative housing society. So it is an example of association of persons. And for body of individuals, you can draw the examples from several community-based organizations. For example, Tamil Sangam in Matunga, Now, if you refer to Tamil Sangam in Matunga, it's a community-based organization. People who belong to state of Tamil Nadu, they have come together and formed this entity. Now, what is the purpose of this entity? The purpose of this entity to pursue some common interest. So maybe they will have some programs for their community members who speak Tamil. They may have some religious programs. They may have some other supportive program for social upliftment and so on. So basically, community-based entities like this will be treated as body of individuals, and they can be here. People can come together for a variety of purpose. For example, you have a group of singers and who come together and form an art circle. Singers, they come together, they perform together, and they support each other to pursue the interest in cultural activities like singing, music, or another example of body of individuals. And either AOP or BOI need not be registered. Mandatory criteria. Okay. Then we come to the local authority. Now, local authority is again not defined in income tax. So we have to find out where the definition is. And there is one very antique piece of legislation dating back to, I think, something like 1887. It's called as General Clauses Act. I hope I'm correct about the year. I hope it is 1887 only, as far as my memory goes. So this General Clauses Act of 1887 tells you what is a local authority. And it tells you that a local authority is a statutory body which is entrusted with the responsibility to manage a local area or a local fund. That is the concept of a local authority. Now, what exactly it means? It means it is a statutory body. It is a body created, an entity created under applicable law. What is the purpose of creating this entity? The purpose is to manage a local area, very important, or a local fund. That is the concept of a local authority. So the examples are Gram Panchayat, Jilla Parishads, municipal corporations, etc. Now, if you see the nature of their status, these are incorporated under the law applicable to them. Not incorporated, these are formed actually under the law which applies to them. The state makes laws for them, and then under those laws, those are formed. For example, Mumbai Municipal Corporation. Okay, so Mumbai Municipal Corporation is the one which is formed under the respective law. So that is a local authority. Then you have similar other entities who are also formed in a similar fashion. For example, Jilla Parishads, they also have the same status. Now, what is their purpose of forming these entities? The purpose of forming these entities is to manage a local area or a local fund. For example, a municipal corporation has a responsibility to manage a local area. So Mumbai Municipal Corporation will have the responsibility to manage a local area. That is, it will look after the sanitation, road, water supply, maybe public transport and health and similar other facilities in that particular area. So that is their function. Apart from that, even a port trust is treated as a local authority. For example, Mumbai Port Trust. Now, Mumbai Port Trust is again a legal body formed under a law. And the purpose of formation of Mumbai Port Trust is to manage the Mumbai port, a specific area. Okay, so that also becomes a local authority. So this is the concept of local authority. Have you understood the concept and the examples of local authority? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Is the concept clear to? Can we proceed? Then we come to the last part, which is the residuary clause. So these residuary clauses are something that covers whatever is not covered earlier. That's the nature of residuary clause. So residuary clause in the definition says every artificial juridical person not covered earlier. Okay. So if a person is not covered earlier, and if the person is an artificial juridical person, that person will still be a person within the purview of section 2, subsection 31. So let us understand what does it mean. It says every artificial, so that means not a natural person, every artificial person. Juridical person, what does it mean? A person created under a law. A juridical person is the one who is created under a law and not covered earlier. So this person is an artificial person. It is a juridical person, that means created under a law and which is not covered by the preceding clauses. Then that entity will still become person for the purpose of definition of section 2, subsection 31. Let's take a couple of examples on this, okay, and then we'll understand what is this artificial juridical person. Suppose you have a case of Mr. X. What will be his status? Where will he fit into? Mr. X. Yes.
Individual.
Individual. That's right. Mr. X will be a simple case of an individual. Now, suppose this Mr. X forms a partnership firm. He has got two more partners, X, Y, and Z, and together they form a partnership firm under 1932 Act. So, which classification will apply to them?
Company.
A firm.
As
Oh,
a
firm.
They are forming a partnership firm. Huh? They are forming a
Company.
partnership firm. Then suppose they form a private limited or public limited company. X with few of his friends or investors or whatever, all of them become shareholders. All of them, some of them are directors, and they form a private limited company. So what will be the status of that entity?
It's a company.
company.
It will. It's a company.
company.
It's a company. Okay. Now, suppose Mr. X, who formed this company and who has formed this partnership firm also, they started their business. Let's take, assume that all of you are aware of Vashi industrial area, Thane, Belapur, TTC industrial area. Okay. So suppose in that area, this private limited company and firm, both of them have their business premises and they are in some manufacturing setup. Okay, so both of them, partnership firm of X and company of Mr. X operating from different premises, are having business in that area, industrial area. There are several other industrial units also in that area. Some are managed by individuals, proprietors. Some are owned by companies like this or partnership firms. Some are owned by maybe HUF. Okay, and all these business units which are in that particular TTC area, they feel that they should come together because they have several problems with MIDC authorities, transport, tax authorities, then pollution control, and so on. So all of them come together and they form an association of industrial business units. All of them are having business units in that area. So they form an association to deal with such common problems with government and other authorities. So they form an association, let's say Vashi Industrial Owners, Industry Owners Association. Okay, what will be the type of entity that they have formed?
Association of person or body of individuals.
No, exactly which one? Because these are two different things. Is it AOP or
Association.
BOI? Yes, it will be an example of association of persons. Why I'm not saying body of individuals? Very simple. AOP can have individual and non-individual as its members. Now, if you recall my discussion, I said there are proprietary units run by individuals. There are units managed by HUF. The members are also private limited companies and partnership firms, etc. And that can make it only AOP and not BOI because everybody is allowed to become a member. So that's an example of AOP. Body of individuals, I gave you several examples, right? So community-based examples, community-based groups and all those things, it will be a case of body of individuals. Local authority also, I gave you a couple of examples like municipal corporation, etc. All of you have heard of Life Insurance Corporation of India, right? All of you know LIC?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. So what is the status of LIC? What could be the status of LIC? Where will it fit into?
Artificial.
Artificial person. Any other answers? Yes, anybody else? What will be the legal status of LIC?
A company.
Is it a company?
A company.
Artificial legal person governed by law.
It will be a case of artificial person.
Yes.
See, in this case, LIC is not formed as a company. The LIC was formed by a special law which was passed by the parliament. Okay. So it is an artificial juridical person which is not covered by earlier clauses. It is not registered as a company. So it will fall in the last clause. It's an artificial person, not an actual person. It's a juridical person. It is created. Under a law. So it will become the entity which will be covered by the residuary clause or the last clause. Apart from that, what about Mumbai University? Where do we place the Mumbai University in this discussion? Which category?
Local.
AOP.
AOP, is it an association of persons?
BOI.
कौन मेंबर्स है BOI में? Okay, let's apply the clauses. Individual तो नहीं है, HUF भी नहीं है, कंपनी है, प्राइवेट या पब्लिक लिमिटेड नहीं है. There is no entity. University is not formed that way. Is it an AOP or BOI? No, it is not an AOP or BOI. It is not a local authority because local authority has altogether a different function. Is it an artificial person? Yes, it's an artificial person. Is it a juridical person? Yes, because it is created under Universities Act. So, example like Mumbai University will be again a residuary category example. It will go into the last category. It's an artificial person, not an actual person, and juridical person that is created under Universities Act. So, Mumbai University will fall within the purview of last clause. Am I clear to you on this with these examples? Sir. Okay. I think that's time to proceed with the next slide.
Sir.
Bolo.
Sir, what is UGC?
UGC is again formed under UGC Act. So it will be an artificial juridical person. Okay. There is a UGC Act under which UGC has been formed, established. So UGC will also go in the last category.
Okay, sir.
Okay, can we go to the next definition? Is the screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Section 27. Okay, just give me a minute. We come to the definition of the word assessee, section 2, subsection 7. I hope the screen is now visible, properly visible. Yes, now this term is quite often used in the Act. And for what purpose this term is used in Act? In the Act, there are several references to responsibility of a person or legal responsibilities of a person, benefits given to a person, compliances expected from the person, procedures to be followed by the person, penalties leviable on a person. And everywhere, you don't find the words like person, taxpayer, etc. In all these places, you'll find a common word known as assessee. So what exactly is meant by assessee is spelled out within the definition of section 2, subsection 7. The first part of the definition says assessee includes every person by whom any tax or any other sum of money is payable under the Act. So the first part of definition says assessee is a person. What kind of person? Who is liable to pay any tax, from whom any tax is payable, who is supposed to pay any tax liability, who is supposed to discharge any tax liability. Then that person becomes assessee. Or a person who is liable to pay any other sum of money. That means the person is liable to pay something else under the Act known as other sum of money. Even in that case, that person becomes an assessee. Let us analyze these aspects and understand. Firstly, it includes every person, and we have just now concluded on the definition of the word person. So we are referring to all those categories of entities which are included within the purview of the word person. So assessee will include all those entities. What kind of person? Who is liable to pay any tax. Now, if you see the words carefully, it doesn't say anywhere that you should have a permanent account number, you should have filed return of income, nothing of that sort. It simply says that you are a person who is liable to pay any tax, you become an assessee. Very simple. Or any other sum of money is payable. Even if you are liable to pay any other sum of money, still you become an assessee. Now, what is this other sum of money? Other sum of money is basically interest or penalty. Under the provisions of income tax, you may be liable to pay some interest. Okay. So when you pay interest for some defaults, that is known as other sum of money. Or you may be liable to pay some penalties under the Act. Even in that case, that is known as other sum of money. So other sum of money basically refers to interest or penalties payable under the Act. So if there is a person who is liable to pay any tax or who is liable to pay any other sum of money, that person becomes an assessee. Very simple case. And it includes all those categories of entities which we have discussed in the context of definition of the word person. Is the first part of definition clear to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now we go to the second part of definition. The second part of definition says the term assessee includes every person against whom any proceedings are taken under the law, that is under the provisions of income tax. Now, what do you mean by proceedings?
Action.
Yes, very good. Proceedings are legal action, basically. Proceeding implies a legal action. So if you are a person against whom any legal action is initiated by tax authorities under the provisions of law, then if it is for specified purpose, then you become the assessee. And what is that specified purpose? That is quoted below. So the first purpose is to determine income of such person or his loss. So if a person is facing any legal action from tax authorities to determine his income or determine his loss is a negative income, then that person becomes an assessee. Now the words used are proceedings under the law. Nowhere it says that the person should have PAN, he should have income tax returns filed earlier, none of those parameters. A simple legal action under the provisions of income tax to determine person's income or loss. That is good enough to make that person an assessee. Now, what is the meaning of legal action? A legal action would even involve a simple communication from tax authorities asking the person to furnish the details of his income or loss. Even that kind of a letter issued under the provisions of law is also termed as a legal proceeding for this purpose. So if a person gets a letter from tax department asking for some details of his income, etc., under particular provision of law, then he becomes an assessee. It is not necessary that he should have taxable income. It is not necessary that he should have a permanent account number. It is not necessary that he should have filed tax returns also. This communication itself is good enough to make him an assessee for the purpose of tax. taxation. Then the next line says to determine the tax payable or refundable to such person. So here we are referring to legal action for another purpose. And what is this legal action for? Either to determine the tax payable. So if the person has to pay any tax, then how much is the tax payable? One has to determine that, one has to establish. And for that purpose, the legal action is taken. Or refundable. If the person has already paid the tax, that may be an extra amount paid by him. So tax authorities will have to refund that money to him. So legal action is taken to refund the excess amount of tax. So now with these two clauses together, we can say that any person against whom any legal action is taken to determine his income or loss or tax payable or tax refundable, such person is covered within the meaning of the word assessee. Are you clear about these two clauses, first two aspects of the definition? Yes?
Sir, slide.
Yes, sir.
Everything is... Sorry?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Can we move on?
Yes, sir.
Now the next clause, to determine the income or loss of another person on whose behalf he is liable for tax. Now see the words here. The legal action is taken, but not for the person himself. The legal action is to determine the income or loss of another person on whose behalf such person is liable for tax. What is the meaning of this? In some cases, a person himself or herself cannot be made liable before the tax authorities. So the action has to be initiated against another person who will represent such person on his behalf. So the action is initiated against that other person. For example, a minor child. Whenever any legal action under income tax has to be taken against a minor child, the notice or the communication or the proceedings will be in the name of his legal guardian, either parent or guardian. So here we are referring to such a scenario. So if tax authorities wish to determine the income of a minor child, they will have to send a communication to his legal guardian or his parent for this purpose. So it is a legal proceeding to determine the income of another person, that is minor child, on whose behalf legal guardian is answerable to tax authorities. And therefore, in such a scenario, the legal guardian, the parent, they will become the assessee for the purpose of taxation. And fourth clause is also on the similar lines. The purpose is different. Here, the legal proceedings are initiated to determine the tax payable by such other person, that is minor child in our example, or refundable to minor child on whose behalf his legal guardian or parent is liable for tax. So whenever such a case arises, then that legal guardian, the representative person in this case, will be answerable to tax authorities and he will be treated as an assessee for this purpose. Are you clear about the four clauses, what we discussed so far? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now the next part is deemed assessee. What do you mean by deemed assessee? In income tax, at times there are fictions and a person is deemed or presumed to be an assessee. One of the example of deemed assessee is trustees of a charitable trust. Now in case of trust, charitable trust, the trustees are deemed to be assessee for this purpose. So they will represent the trust before the tax authorities. So it can be a fiction where trustees are assumed to be the assessee for this purpose. And the last is assessee in default. Under the provisions of law, there are several provisions where some compliances are expected. And if the person is not complying with the law, if there is a default, then that person becomes an assessee in default. So if there is a non-compliance with the provision of law, then that person will become assessee in default. For example, a person is liable to apply for permanent account number subject to certain conditions if he fulfills certain conditions. If he fails to do that, he will become an assessee in default. A person who has a taxable income is supposed to file his return of tax within the stipulated time. If he fails to do that, it's a classic case of assessee in default. So whenever there is a non-compliance with law, that person will be deemed to be considered to be an assessee in default. Is the concept of assessee clear to everyone? Yes, any queries?
No, sir.
So last point, can you please explain once again?
Assessee in default?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, I'll explain that. See, under the provisions of income tax, one has certain legal responsibility. And if you do not fulfill that legal responsibility, then there is a default. So whenever the person who commits this kind of a default is known as assessee in default. One has to file the return of tax, one has to apply for permanent account number. If tax liability is there, then one has to pay the tax liability. And there are several other compliances. If at all there is a default in adhering to these compliances of law, then that will be called as a case of assessee in default. Okay, if you make any default in compliance with income tax, that is good enough to call that person as an assessee in default. Clear now? Yes?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, we'll proceed with the next. Assessment year, section 2, subsection 9. If you read the definition, it says that assessment year is a period of 12 months commencing on first day of April every year. So very simple definition which says that what is an assessment year? It's a period of 12 months commencing on first day of April every year. So if you are referring to assessment year 2020-21, then we are referring to a period which commences on 1st April 2020 and it's a period of 1 year or 12 months. So it concludes on 31st March 2021. So assessment year is a period of 12 months commencing on 1st day of April every year. Now the definition is simple, but what is the relevance? What is the use of this definition? Basically, an assessment year is a frame of reference. Why frame of reference? In the beginning, I told you the Income Tax Act was passed in 1961. Income tax rules were made in 1962. And since then, over a period of time, there have been several changes in the law. Whenever the budget is presented in the Parliament, Annual Finance Act, that is one of the way of change in the Act. So Act could be changed through the provisions in the budget. Similarly, the rate of tax is not spelled out in the Act or in the rules. So where is the rate of tax? The rate of tax keeps on changing and that is included in your Annual Finance Act or a budget. So all these things are with reference to a particular period. Whenever there is a change in law, you should know when the change will be effective. Will the change be effective from 1971? Will the change be effective from 1980? Will it be applicable in current financial year? All those things need clarity. And we need a frame of reference for that. And therefore, the concept of assessment year. So whenever you amend any provision, you say that this provision is applicable from assessment year so and so. So one is clear as to the applicability of that change in tax law, rule, or whatever. Similarly, whenever there is a budget in which rate of tax is proposed, that rate of tax is also with reference to the assessment year. So you know for which assessment year which rate of tax would apply, because again the rate of tax may change year after year, and therefore one should clearly understand the time frame for application of tax rate. So that application of tax rate is also with reference to the assessment year. So whenever you are trying to determine your income, taxable income, and the tax liability, you will apply the appropriate provisions of that time frame, which is assessment year. So if you want to compute tax liability, if you want to compute your taxable income, see which assessment year you are trying to refer to. Consider the provisions applicable for that particular assessment year. Consider the tax rate applicable for that year, and then you can find out what is the income and what is the tax payable for that particular period. So it's basically a frame of reference. It's basically a time frame which we refer to find out the change of taxation laws, to find out the rate of tax applicable, and so on. Okay. There is one more definition which goes hand in hand with assessment year, and that is previous year. Okay. So what is the relationship between these two, and how do they go hand in hand, and what is the concept of previous year? I think we can defer this discussion to the next lecture because we may not have sufficient time to conclude on that. So let's not rush through. Okay. So today we have concluded with the definition of the word assessment year. Next lecture, we will start with the definition of previous year, and that time again we'll have to make a reference to the concept of assessment year, because these two things will always go hand in hand. Any queries on whatever we have discussed today?
So this video
No,
will be
sir.
available on YouTube.
This tax lecture,
Yes, sir.
tax lecture I have not uploaded so far. Mostly I will upload today's lecture. Okay, because so far we have not discussed any concrete in taxation. No? So far I have not uploaded. I have been uploading only financial accounting lectures so far, but I'll upload now tax lecture. Mostly today's lecture, if the recording is fine, then I will upload today's lecture. Today onwards I can start that. Okay.
Okay,
Anything
sir.
else? Any other queries?
Sir, you will be sending this PPT in group.
Yeah, I will send the PPT in the
Yes.
group. Not a problem. Yeah, I'll
Yes,
share
sir.
the PPT in the group.
Okay, sir.
So, somebody was asking anything else? Okay. So we conclude then today's lecture. Thank you very much. And